Okay. Got to top Stormy Daniels, right? That's the goal?
Yeah, absolutely. In entertainment value. So thank you so much for coming, Anthony. I thought I'd start with, you were here, and for those of you who don't know, in 2017, October, quite shortly after the end of your 11-day tenure. I think the president very rudely referred to it as a 10-day post.
No, actually, he said 11.
Did he? Okay, all right. For us.
No, it was the media that was trying to jip me out of 9.1% of my federal career. Yeah, it was 11. I mean, why leave out that last day? I mean, that was a big day. That's when I got fired, right? I mean, it was a big day.
Yeah, if it didn't happen, you'd still be there, perhaps. So.
I don't know about that. No, that was a short-lived job, one way or the other. So remember, when I took the job on the 21st of July, the president made a decision which really was quite fateful for me. You probably didn't read the press release, but it said I was going to be his White House communications director and I was going to report directly to him. So when he did that, that was game over for me. No matter who the next chief of staff was I was getting fired, because you can't have two people directly reporting to the president in a chain of command situation like that. But anyway.
But so since then, you've been quite disparaging of Trump's politics, calling it anti-American, divisive, particularly in reference to sort of policy goals like the Mexican Wall and kind of, blaming terrorism on Islamic immigration and those sorts of, those sorts of points he had. When did you first, take a stance against Trump, and why did you do it?
Okay, so I think it's important to apply context. I think that all of us that worked for Donald Trump owe people an apology. And so I have said my piece and I've offered my apology. But I think it's interesting that Nikki Haley hasn't, Mike Pompeo hasn't, the vice president hasn't. And so what is that apology? Ultimately, we had cognitive dissonance in dealing with him. So if he was saying something nasty during the campaign about Mexicans, we were like, okay, well, he's our guy, we'll tolerate that. If he said something incendiary related to the Islamic faith, you may remember during the campaign, he said that he was going to block every person who was a Muslim from coming into the country. Okay, we had an obligation at that time to speak out against that or to drop out of the campaign. I didn't do that, so you can find me morally bereft, or you can find me human or weak, or however you'd like to describe it, but we needed to do that, okay? And so by not doing that, we created this more incendiary environment, this more racially charged environment, and we were accomplices to him. Okay, so again, the current crop of politicians that work for him, they won't be that honest about the situation. Okay, so I've offered that apology to people, I've talked about it openly, and I'm sharing that apology with you guys tonight. But to put it into context, when you're in politics, you don't get everything that you want. Ed Koch, who was the mayor of New York, he once said at a speech, he said, listen, if you like everything that I'm saying, if you believe 9 out of the 12 things that I'm saying, you should vote for me. But if you believe 12 out of the 12 things that I'm saying, you need a psychiatrist. Okay, the point being that you're never going to find the perfect fingerprint between yourself and a political candidate. But the fingerprints with Trump were too far off. But we tolerated it. The White House was mayhem. When I got fired, I made a decision, again, rightly or wrongly, that I didn't want to be that bitter guy. I didn't want to be that guy to denounce President Trump or speak out against him, even though there was a lot of mayhem going on. And so I held my tongue, and for 2 years, I generally supported him. I was on the Bill Maher show, coincidentally enough, with Stormy Daniels. This was August of 2019, and I was defending him on a lot of different things. But the question came up about the 4 women of the squad. And so for the Brits here, there are 4 congresswomen that are called the squad. They're sort of hard left people. Mr. Trump, President Trump, wrote on Twitter that they should go back to the countries they originally came from. The irony there is that 3 of them were born in the United States. 1 was a naturalized citizen. All 4 duly elected in their congressional districts. And so the woman I was on the stage with said to me, well, what do you think of that comment? And I said, well, I can't defend that comment. That comment is American nativism. It's a racially charged comment, and the president shouldn't talk like that. He's the president, should be president for everybody. If he doesn't like their ideas, let's debate their ideas in the free marketplace of ideas, and if our ideas are better than theirs, we'll win. So when the show ended, Bill said to me, Bill Maher, he said, "Oh, Trump's going to roast you tomorrow on Twitter." And I was like, "No, there's no way Trump's going to do that." I was generally defending him. And then Bill said to me, "No, you were 7 for 8 for Donald Trump. You got to go 13 for 10. And of course, that's mathematically impossible. And so I was not meeting the purity of support test. Kayleigh McEnany took heat from Donald Trump last week, his former press secretary, because she said he was 25% ahead in the polls instead of 39, and he went after her, even though she's been generally supportive of him. So he started attacking me, but guys, I'm a New Yorker, and I'm not a politician. So I hit him very hard, and then he didn't like that, so he hit me hard. Then I think I called him a few nicknames that he really didn't like. And then the fight really started. And then I said that there's something wrong with him, that he could get into these types of fights and he could alienate people that have generally supported him, and he will not win re-election. This was in August of 2019. And then those things that you're referencing started coming up. And so when I had the opportunity to talk about it, I was open about it, and I talked about it. And listen, though, I think this is very important. Whatever your feelings are for him, whether you're a supporter of his, you're not a supporter of his, he doesn't love the democracy. He does not like the Constitution. You're going to learn in the next 3 or 4 weeks, because of Mark Meadows, what Mr. Trump was doing during the first week of January, and literally thinking that he was going to be able to figure out a way to keep the power and the position that he was in, disavowing the entire system that was set up. And he's a sore loser. He's the first American president in the modern era that didn't attend the inauguration of his successor. He didn't help with the transition. And he's just not the right guy to be the president. So I think it's very important that people that love the country, that are patriots more than they are partisans, to talk honestly about it.
Yeah.
But I do own the mistake I made, and I do own the lack of moral clarity in that decision making, and I regret that. But here's the thing, and these young people in the room, you can't go back. You can make a mistake, you can own the mistake, you can offer your apology, but I can't wake up in the morning with a millstone of regret on my neck every day. You got to let things go, and you've got to go forward. I think it's very important for people to do that for themselves. Otherwise, tell me the person that hasn't made a mistake, I'll show you either the saint or the extreme liar, okay, one or the other.
No, absolutely. I think what a lot of people respect is the frankness and the honesty. As you said, a lot of people from within the administration haven't been that open. And you're quite right.
But privately they are, guys.
Yeah,
okay, so privately they will say everything that I've said. They'll say it to their donors, they'll say it to their families, but they won't say it in public.
Yeah. And I think from the perspective of most of most people in Britain, when we look and we see, what happened on January the 6th, and the fact that wherever you, like, as you say, lie on partisan political questions, surely it's apparent that Donald Trump isn't the right individual to lead America as a democracy, and that, the contempt he has for the Constitution, something that so many Americans feel so strongly about. How is it, do you think, that he's still in this race for the Republican nomination? What's happening there?
So I think you guys are experiencing this in the United Kingdom, and I'll try to describe it to the best of my capability. And again, it's an expression of some more of my shortcomings, because I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood. My dad was a crane operator. He was an hourly worker, so he was subjected to the whims of the economy. When the economy was booming, we got overtime pay. When the economy was not doing well, his hours got cut back, and there was a lot of financial anxiety in our house growing up, but we grew up in the middle class. I would never dishonor my dad by telling you that I grew up poor. I did not grow up poor. I was decidedly in the middle class. But that very same job today that my dad had in the 70s is paying 30% less in real economic terms. So yes, the wages went up, but they're inflation adjusted, they're down 30%. And I want you to see that picture across America. I want you to see that picture in the Rust Belt or places that I traveled with Mr. Trump. And I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico in May of 2016, and we had 9,000 people at the Albuquerque Civic Center, and I crossed the Secret Service perimeter to go talk to some of these people. And one man said to me that something I'll never forget. He said, yeah, my dad was at the factory for 30 years. He got himself a pension. I got let go after 12 years. They moved the factory. Anthony, you think you're in New Mexico? New Mexico, oh, that would be Mexico, because that's where the factory moved. And we lost in the United States 65,000 factories like that after the signing of the NAFTA agreement in the early 90s. And so his support, whether you like it or not, is coming from those people. We turned the country's blue-collar people primarily into, the family I grew up in, it was economically aspirational. Some of us were going to go to Tufts and Harvard and live the American dream. But those very same families feel economically desperational. And so they see Trump as an avatar for them. They see him as an avatar and a representative of their anger. They dislike the establishment. They don't want to take the vaccine. They dislike the political establishment. They dislike the medical establishment. They dislike the media establishment, the academic establishment. And here comes Mr. Trump with his message, and they're galvanized to him. They see him as their last great white hope. So Trump said something 6 years ago, that he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and it didn't matter, he would have unwavering support. And not only is that true, he got arraigned in Lower Manhattan, his hometown, his city. He was arrested and arraigned in his city, and his poll numbers went up. So there is something there that we have to address as our society. We have to figure out a way to recouple that group of people, reconnect them to the social contract of the society. The great irony is he can represent them and express their anger, but he's never come up with one policy solution or one idea to make the thing better. But that's why he has such ardent support.
And that's what's so, confusing even about the narrow, the narrow margin by which he lost. The fact that his huge mishandling of the pandemic, leading to economic collapse, in real terms, led to far worse conditions for that group of voters, and yet they still, on the majority, continued to vote for him. And I guess this leads to my next question, which is, do you think that Joe Biden, who, when he was campaigning, was really focusing on this idea of unity and bringing back the American people, do you think he's done enough there, or is that, or no?
Well, I mean, he has a very good legislative record. If you go through the president's legislative record, he has gotten a lot done. And he's also, he's the counterdote to Donald Trump. I think people were literally mentally and physically exhausted from the incessant tweeting and the constant hysteria that was going on, at least the people that were attuned to the politics. And so he is sort of more a traditional person. But I think the elephant in the room is the age of both of the candidates. Now, I'm not an ageist. If they're capable of doing the job, God bless, they should do the job. But I think we have to ask ourselves that question going forward. And I think America has a problem where these people don't want to ever leave power. It's classic Shakespearean theater where Chuck Grassley, I know he's probably the grandfather of George Washington or something. I mean, this guy is going to stay in office for another 500 years or something like that. And it's not helping the American people. And this political generation, in my opinion, has frankly failed the American people, because whether it's Joe Biden or any of them, let's just do the math, we had $7 trillion of deficit spending from George Washington to George Walker Bush. Obama, Trump, Biden, we have $25 trillion of deficit spending. So you just have to think about the magnitude of that. You have to think about the pressure that puts on middle-class people, because you guys know this because you're at Oxford, you're smart people, but we're printing the money. And we have to print the money, and we have to have the Federal Reserve buy our debt, put it on its balance sheet so that we can artificially suppress the interest rates related to all of this. And it will end, and it will likely end poorly if we keep this up. So you're asking good questions. Has he created unity? No. he has created calmness. He's done a lot of interesting things that I think have been helpful to the country. He has been unwavering in his support for the Ukraine. If you like that, and I do like that, I'm happy to explain why and how important it is to the world. It's very, very important. Just being candid about it, because you have to understand, you can never take these freedoms, the free speech of this union, the idea of Western liberalism for granted. You can't take it for granted. And whether you like this or not, 2/3 of the world's population is under some form of thuggery or tyranny or authoritarianism. And you have to stand together and hold the line somewhere. And so he's doing that. And so I like that. Mr. Trump would not do that. Mr. Trump wanted to abrogate the NATO treaty, and he'd have Putin's tanks rolling into Poland right now.
And I think when we sort of talk about this group who's become heavily disenfranchised, and you say that the inflation and the huge deficit spending's a part of it, but it seems to me that when you mentioned they need to be brought back into the social contract, the way that they were initially brought into the social contract was on effectively a myth, right? The American dream, and it's a myth that America is a true meritocracy, and that can never really be achieved. As in, do you agree with that, or do you think that more can be done?
Well, my personal story is an example of it, and I know a lot of people that I grew up with that are examples of it. I think you're making an interesting point, because there's no pure meritocracy, and there's obviously people get inherited wealth in a country, and as a result of which they get requisite privilege and all those things. I don't bemoan that or debate that. I don't think people should play the victim. They should be given, though, some base level of equal opportunity. A good government and a wealthy country will figure out a way to create some level of a starting block for people. I'm not an equal outcome person. It's just against human nature. And I want there to be Jeff Bezoses or Bezoses of the world, and others that grow these big businesses. And if they get untold wealth as a result of that, God bless them. There should be mechanisms that allow for that. But yes, by and large, the United States has large pockets of meritocracy still. It's more difficult today. The area that I grew up in, the people would have a harder time making it out of the area. The school system is rougher. It's less even. There's less of a healthy curriculum in the school system to allow people to rise. And there's an unevenness. You tell me the zip code of the child, I can tell you whether or not they can get a good public education in the United States. But having said all of that, you have a platform in the United States where if you work hard and you create a business or you create a good idea, you can generate a really positive outcome for yourself and your family. You may not get into certain country clubs, you may not get into certain schools, but you have that opportunity. So I grew up with parents that were uneducated. They're first generation Americans. I ended up going to Tufts, Harvard Law School. I went to Goldman Sachs. I built 2 successful businesses. And hey, it was 11 days in the White House, but I got my ass into the White House. Okay, and so you can't tell me that there isn't some level of meritocracy in the United States. I won't buy that. Having said that, it's harder, and I think it's incumbent upon really good public servants to figure out a way to make it easier for people and make the society flatter from a starting point and fairer from a starting point.
So moving on from that, and also touching on your view on foreign policy as well. Who are you supporting against Trump for the Republican nomination? And what policy would you suggest?
So I'm a lifelong Republican. If Trump doesn't get the nomination and one of the other candidates gets the nomination, I will likely support that candidate. If Trump gets the nomination, I am a patriot first and a partisan second. I will be with Joe Biden again because he represents a systemic danger to the country and a systemic danger to the world. And so I will be out there as much as I can explaining that to people and explaining what he's actually capable of and what he's actually done. And I do believe last time, guys like General Kelly and General Mattis, H.R. McMaster were less outspoken because they wanted to keep the military and the experience they had in the military out of the political system. I believe they will be more outspoken this time. There's really just a laying out for people how dangerous he is. So that's the general feeling. I have thrown my support in the primary behind Governor Christie. Somebody asked me something earlier today, which I'll repeat. Do I think Governor Christie could be effective in bringing that prosecutorial case against Trump and seeing if you could dismantle Trump in the primaries? And I don't know the answer to that, but I'm willing to put my money behind that. I don't know if Governor Christie can get to the presidency, get to the nomination, but weird things happen in politics. But I'll tell you what, if he got to the presidency, he's a capable person, he's a smart person, and he's a safe pair of hands. And I would recommend to the people that are voting that we have to vote for somebody and support somebody that believes in the institution of the democracy, the Constitution, the diffusion of power at the top, and the checks and balances, because that's ultimately what made America, whatever you think of America today, okay, and it has its standing in the world has worsened. You can be objective and honest about it. But if I took you back to the 80s when I came here as a student, America was very well respected, was very well thought of around the world. People looked up to America. I was with a group of Emiratis last night for dinner in London, and one of the gentlemen is in his 60s now, and he was a student in the UAE, and they looked up to America. And again, I'm not saying we need people to look up to America or not, and the whole American exceptionalism thing, we can talk about it if you want, but I think we need to respect what got America to that level. And I think we have downshifted, if you will, into a nastiness in the political environment that doesn't serve our ancestors well. It's not a good reflection on our ancestors and what our ancestors wanted for our country.
And I completely agree. I'm an American citizen, and as
you're tall enough to be president too. So I don't know, if you're nice to me, maybe I'll back you when you're ready.
I'd much appreciate that. But one of your when you were in the sort of president-elect transition team, you gave a speech at Davos, I think, in January of 2017.
I did.
You spoke right after Xi Jinping about against economic protectionism, something that Trump then later did quite a lot of. How do you think that America and also Britain, Europe should approach China?
So, I obviously remember that day very well because President Xi was speaking more or less at the same time that I was speaking. But I was in that speech. If you go back to the transcript, I wasn't speaking against quote unquote protectionism. Trump went way further than any of us thought on his economic team or wanted him to go. But what I did say in that speech, I think it's very important for people to understand this because you're a student of history. The United States made several big decisions at the end of the Second World War. Decision number one, when the General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs were put in place, the United States had 65% of the world's industrial output and about 2.5% of the world's population. It was the last industrial standing nation because it wasn't devastated in the war. A result of which it was arguably the most powerful country in the world by those metrics in world history. But the United States made a decision to uneven the trade playing field. Go back and look at it. The General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs, the United States accepted tariffs and embargoes from other countries, and we allowed goods and services to flow into the United States to help those countries. And the goal, the post-World War II goal for those leaders like Truman and Atkinson and Marshall, Eisenhower, et cetera, was to build the global architecture of peace through peace and prosperity and through global trade, the whole David Ricardo principle. The problem, and I'm not blaming anybody, I'm just making this observation, when you fast forward, the problem was we over-tipped in that direction. So we allowed the Chinese, at a time when they wanted to seek economic reform, to link their currency to the US dollar. That was a Kissinger, Nixon, Carter decision with Deng Xiaoping. As they were building those factories, their currency should have gotten stronger. our currency was getting weaker because we were deficit spending and monetizing our debt. So we created this very robust trade environment for the Chinese. Okay, that's how they got their 10, 11, 12% growth over that period of time. We then made a decision to let the Chinese into the World Trade Organization, which I totally agreed with. But remember, they came in as an emerging country. So if you look at the advantages that China had coming in, they don't need those same advantages today. So my message was, in the effort to help people, there's always cause and effect, and there's always side effects. And one of the side effects is that we had massive uptick in globalization, massive uptick in capital mobility out of the country, and it devastated the middle and lower class. It just did. And so I was saying in the speech, we have to understand why we did it, and then we have to correct for it without getting overly jingoistic, overly nationalistic, or overly protectionistic. But Trump didn't do that. But our economic platform at the time was to do that, and that's what I was trying to explain in that speech.
And so would you also say that we also need to recognize the huge economic interdependence that wasn't there before, and that, engulfing on a kind of Cold War-esque, approach would be very different from, actual Cold War with Russia, where there was very little trade link, but actually probably have a worse impact on the U.S. economy as a whole, and then those lower and middle classes, or do you not think?
So no, I think what you're saying is true, but just imagine this irony though. So those trade deals got put in place, and the restrictions and the tariffs got put in place, but the Biden administration didn't take the tariffs off.
No.
Okay, and so, like it or not, there is political unity in the United States vis-a-vis the opinion of U.S. leadership related to China. And I'm not in love with that, because I think better, more transformative leaders would move the country away from that, right? So, this is simplistic, but just let me go with this metaphor for a second. There are two types of leaders. There's a thermometer. They check the temperature outside and they say, okay, here's the temperature. People in the country dislike China. Let's have a hard China policy. Okay, that's a thermometer. Then there's a thermostat, right? You're in your living room or your bedroom. The temperature is 80 degrees and you want to get it to 72. You set the coordinates and you bring the temperature down. Okay, so a really good leader would explain and move and the American people and educate the American people where they need to go, not where they are, and play to where they are. You see what's happening right now? And that's very, very dangerous, because whether you like the Chinese system, you like the Chinese Communist Party, you like or dislike them, we have an interdependence with them, and we have a need to figure out a way to cohabitate on this planet with them. And I'll take you back to one of Jack Kennedy's best speeches, which was June of 1963, where he was about to sign the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. He was giving a speech at American University, and John Kennedy said that, hey, we are breathing the same air, we're drinking the same water, and we have our common humanity, so we have to figure this out. Okay, and so we need more aspirational leadership and more thermostatic leadership, as opposed to the stuff what's going on right now, which is just reflecting the Americans. Again, my observation, 71 campaign stops with Donald Trump. I got fired, it raised my profile, so I've done a lot of speaking around the country. The Americans are afraid. And the Americans feel less confident today than they did in the 1980s, and they feel less secure about their economic standing. And so what do? When you have a situation like that? You plan. And I submit to everybody here in this room, I want you to think about this. What American leader have you met with or heard from or saw on television that has a 10-year plan for America, or a 15-year plan for America? Or, okay, we have to right-size the entitlement spending, figure out a way to get the budget back into balance. We've got to even up the K through 12 public education system, which is ridiculously unfair to a very large group of people. And here are the 10, 15, and 20-year plans to do that. And if we work together, we can get these things done. They're solvable problems. And the answer to that question is no one's doing that. We've got a 2-minute plan. We've got a cable news talking point plan. We're going to bash these other skulls, and we're going to figure out a way to stay in our respective tribes so that we can preserve our power. I just want you to think about this. Okay, I live in a country where we gerrymander. And so I guess everybody knows what that means, but more or less, they pick the voters. They size the congressional districts. The congressional districts used to look like geometric shapes that I could recognize from ninth grade geometry. Now they look like jigsaw puzzles. So I submit to you rhetorically, are you in a true democracy if the politicians are picking the voters? I thought the voters were supposed to pick the politicians. But they've done this now so that they can stay in perpetual power. They've screened their enemies and their adversaries out of their districts so that they can permanently stay in power. And then they get all of this lucre from the lobbyists. $70 billion is being spent on 535 people now in Washington to influence their decision making. And and this is Brookings Institute, or go to a think tank, don't go by me. Since the Citizens United Supreme Court case where they opened the spigot on political donations under the guise that it was a First Amendment right, which effectively made the citizens separate but equal. It's almost like a Plessy versus Ferguson for donations. And so your vote as a middle-class person or a low middle-class person is not even with the billionaire, because the billionaire can spend $1 billion on influencing the politician. And guess what's happened over the last 12 years in Citizens United? The voting has been skewed towards benefiting the rich, either through tax cuts, loopholes, estate planning, all these different things. And the American people are not happy about it. Go look at the polling. They are rejecting the approval rating for the Congress. I think Kim Il-jung has like a higher approval rating in America. He's the North Korean dictator than the Congress. I mean, they're down to their paid staff and their relatives at this point. And so we have to fix these things. If we don't fix these things, it will continue to grind in this way, which is not going to be helpful long-term to the U.S., and it's not going to be helpful for the world. People won't like this. I'm saying this as an American, but I'm going to say it. The standing of the U.S. was generally good for a very long time, and it more or less benefited the world. Not perfect, the Vietnam War, we list all of the atrocities of America. But it was generally in good standing for a very long time. And it would benefit the world, and would benefit our country if we sort of return to that sort of idea,
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my thought on it.
And when you look at election maps going back to Reagan and before, when there was a presidential victory, it's red or blue across the whole nation, and that kind of result is unthinkable now. And when it comes to the sort of radical 15, 20-year change plans that you're talking about, I suppose it's quite difficult. A lot of people, skeptics, would say it's quite difficult to do that in democracy where everyone's thinking in election cycles. But you previously here actually described yourself as socially inclusive. And do you think when it comes to sort of a lot of some of these reforms, like improving education to be socially inclusive, that it's far easier for the right than the left to do it because they can't get attacked, by the further right? And I know, for example, with like gay marriage, Ted Olson, who came a few weeks ago, actually was one of the, it was a benefit to have a really known Republican.
No, I know Ted a long time.
Prosecutor on it.
I was a donor on that. I was in 2008. I gave money to the 4 Republican state senators in New York that supported the gay rights initiative, the gay marriage. I have, like many of you, if not all of you, I have gay family members. I didn't choose my sexuality. Perhaps you did, but I'm just giving you my personal experience. I didn't choose it. I don't think we should be going after people related to their sexual orientation. That's my personal view. It's also a libertarian view. And I argue with these conservatives all the time. You guys are for a smaller government everywhere, but in my bedroom, you want a larger government. Okay, it's very, very hypocritical. So yes, the answer is, the problem, the tension right now, at least in America, I can't speak for the UK, is in the culture. The tension is in the culture and is in the timing. The question is, should they be talking about gender identity in the first or second grade in an elementary school? And there are many parents in the United States that feel that that is inappropriate. And there are politicians like Ron DeSantis that are trying to capitalize on that. If you're asking me my personal view on this stuff, I've already had the conversation with my younger children. And my younger children, I believe, I have adult children and some younger children, they need to be aware of the world and the way the world works, and they need to be comfortable in their own skin. This is a very short life, and you're born a certain way, you should be comfortable in your own skin, and you should be electing political leaders that have the subtlety and the understanding to allow for that, but then also to respect each other's cultural values. If I'm a traditional cultural conservative, you don't necessarily have to put it in my face, but the flip side is you should have the freedom to do whatever it is you want. And I think this is the problem in the country. We have so much space for everybody just to live their lives. But we've got social media, and we've got the antagonism of that, and we've got the right-leaning television stations or the left-leaning television stations that are constantly trying to gin up these anxieties among each other. You've got people on Fox News watching Fox News. I mean, I guess they're like buying catheters and like walkers on the commercial breaks, but when they watch Fox News, they're being incited to believe that the hordes of lesbians are going to come over the transom and take over their lives. Okay, and it's nonsensical, and it's sort of despicable to somebody like me, but it's designed to create this cycle of addiction to watching this. Is this grievance addiction? Again, but our leaders don't talk about it. They're afraid to talk about it, because if they talk about it in a room like this and they say one syllable wrong or something that somebody doesn't like, they get canceled or they get lambasted. And but they're difficult conversations, but we need to have them. And we need to figure out a way to get it together and respect each other no matter what our personal lives are and no matter what we're doing personally.
Absolutely. And just the final question before we move to the audience. I saw you say before that one of your kind of sort of anecdotes was Reagan in his office had a plaque that said you can get a lot done as long as you don't care who takes the credit, and that really stuck with me. And I was wondering if you could just share your final thoughts to us. Many of people in the union have aspirations to be leaders, not just in politics, but and you yourself have been a leader both as I said, politically but also entrepreneurially. What are your key messages about what leadership means and how to be a leader?
Well, the first thing you have to have is some level of comfort in your own skin, and you have to have some level of personal security. Insecure people do not make good leaders, and insecure people, they end up hiring people that are not as talented. So if you're a B player, you're hiring C players to make yourself feel good. If you're an A player, you're hiring A plus players, and they're hopefully bringing up the average of the whole group. And I think what Reagan had, he had a plaque on the desk in the Oval Office. You could buy it at the Reagan Library, but it said, you can get anywhere you want in life as long as you don't care who gets the credit. And the point was that Reagan was going to create an open tent and bring the smartest people into the tent to work with him. Okay, so he didn't have the personal insecurity. So young people that are aspiring to leadership, it has to be collaborative. The most successful leaders will form a collaboration with a very large group of people. If you look at successful presidential administrations, they're bringing super wickedly smart people to the positions, and they're bringing adversaries. Lincoln brought in 3 or 4 of his adversaries. Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote a book about it.
Rivals.
President Obama, again, like or dislike him, but he brought his chief adversary, Hillary Clinton, into the administration to be a Secretary of State. And it was a big job for her, and it was helpful to him. And so you have to be willing to do that as a leader. I don't want to bring it back to Trump, but I just want to explain that he is ridiculously insecure. And so I was in meetings with him where he would actually bully somebody who knew more about the epidemic, or he would bully somebody, he would tell people that he was smarter than his generals. He told Mike Bloomberg, Bloomberg supported Hillary Clinton, but he was a good sport. He called Trump during the presidential transition. He got on the phone with President-elect Trump. He said, I wish you the best of luck. Do the best you possibly can to hire the smartest people around there. And Trump literally said to him on the phone, that will not be necessary. I am the smartest person that there is. And, he probably obviously doesn't think that, but that's his insecurity, right? I've been in rooms with him where somebody was trying to explain to him the difference between a Shia and a Sunni because he didn't know. And the person was trying to explain it to him, and he felt that they were being pedantic, and he just steamrolled them. But he also didn't want the other people in the room to know that he didn't know. You see what I mean? That's insecurity. Okay, and so you want to be a good leader or a good parent, show your flaws to people. Because if you can show your flaws to people, you can give them space for their flaws. Okay, and so I tell my team, we're going to grow the business, but if you make a mistake, I've got your back. Okay, I'm not going to be that guy that's the bottleneck where every decision has to come through me. We built a cryptocurrency business, we built a hedge fund advisory business, we built a think tank or a conference business, and there's no way I could do all of that myself if I didn't empower people and delegate to people and give them the space for them to run with things, but then also to back them up if something's going wrong. Trump was not like that, right? So if you did something wrong, he would never, he said repeatedly, never was his fault. Anything that went wrong wasn't his fault, and he was doing this to his people. So you can't do that as a leader. Honestly, it just doesn't work.
Brilliant.
Can we take some questions from the audience?
Yeah. Yes, the member just here.
Thank you so much again for coming to speak with us today, Mr. Scaramucci. My question is, you've mentioned publicly that you believe it's very possible that Trump could drop out of the race. If that is the case, who do you think would most likely be, the upcoming candidate, or who do you think would win in that case? That's
a really good question. So, I'll just give you, this is a little bit of a contrarian theory, and I think the number one reason why I think it's possible that he could leave the race is that his kids are not into it. And Jared and Ivanka have very publicly stated that they don't want to be part of the campaign and they don't want to be part of a future administration. And for somebody like Donald Trump, who I've known a long period of time, that's a big deal because he built Trump Organization with his family. He built the reality television show with his family. He worked in the White House and built the campaign with his family. And their absence is very conspicuous. And I think that's hard on him personally. Again, whether you like him or dislike him, he is a human being. And so I think that's hard on him. The second thing is the onslaught of the legal issues that he's facing. So it's not just the rape case, which looks like he has to pay a settlement for. It's not the arraignment in Manhattan where he was arrested in March and brought into an arraignment. It's not the January 6th potential indictment or the indictment in Georgia for tampering with the election or the document indictment, but it may be all of them together. Okay, so the totality of that, even though we have him in our minds as indestructible and he can withstand all of this and his supporters believe he could run the presidency from the jail cell if he's unfairly put into jail, this stuff has a havoc wreaking on your system, on your stress levels, and who you are. And so I think it could happen that he takes a powder, fakes an illness, or does something like that. He's way ahead in the polls, though, and so that will keep him in the race. So if somebody gets in there that can create some activity or traction for him or herself, that would be additive to knocking him out of the race. But I don't see anybody in the field right at this moment that can be the lead dog. Okay, I like Christie the most because I think he's the most competent and I think he's the most level-headed and he's probably the smartest of the people that are on the field right now. And I know that DeSantis is perceived to be, the number two person vis-a-vis Donald Trump. I think Trump's polling in the 40s and he's polling in the 20s or something like that. But I don't see him making it. This table's like more entertaining and more charismatic than Ron DeSantis. We could have a conversation with the table. He doesn't have the, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. He doesn't have that savoir-faire. He doesn't have that element to his personality, and he's very thin-skinned. So, I've had everything that you could possibly be said about somebody said about me. I actually don't give a shit. Okay, and I'm happy to be in the fight, and I'm a happy warrior. but DeSantis will boycott interviews. You know, I had some woman from Bloomberg. I mean, she ripped me like, I was like, did I date this woman like 20 or 30 years ago? I mean, she was just going crazy on me. It was like a full jihad. You can read the article. It was just unbelievable. It was very vicious and personal. And she wanted to come to my conference. So she wrote this article, destroyed me. It was at the top of the Bloomberg page for like 5 days. And then she applied to come to our conference. And my staff didn't want to let her in. I'm like, what are you guys, nuts? Of course we're letting her in. Number one, we believe in the free press. Number two, she can write anything that she wants. That's her entitlement. Okay, and number three, I'm a big boy. I can take the heat. You see what I mean? But this guy is like a big baby. You know, he boycotted the NBC News. You can't run for president. You know, you said, what's your first name again?
Matthew.
Matthew, you said a question to me I didn't like, so I'm going to boycott you now. I mean, come on. You got to be able to sit in there and take the heat, you know? And so I don't think DeSantis will make it. That's my honest opinion. He's too boring. He's got a lot of money, but he's also made a lot of mistakes with Disney and in Florida.
Yes, just there.
Hi, Mr. Scaramucci. First of all, it was lovely meeting you outside about an hour ago. Second of all, my question is, it's a bit of a 2 or 3 part question. I'm assuming you believe in climate change. Do you believe that nuclear power is a solution to climate change? And do you think that there is space for America to be a global leader in that, in bringing
really good
not only
question.
nuclear power to the U.S., but exporting it to the world and being economic and business leader in that?
I do believe in climate change. I think the data is irrefutable. And so I absolutely believe in climate change, and we have to come up with a solution. It's too long of a conversation, but I don't think we're going about it the right way. Okay, I think, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, we're in an incentive-based, primarily free market capitalist society, and we should be figuring out at the governmental level to totally incent people. So if you're burning less carbon or contributing less to the footprint, you can get some economic value from that, either through tax policy or some other type of thing. And barring that, the nanny effect of just telling people to spend less on carbon, you know, and hearing it from somebody like Al Gore, who's flying around in a G650, you know, and he's got like 17 houses, and he'll tell you, well, I bought some carbon offsets. I don't think that's going to get us to where we need to go. But I do believe that we have the issue. Oliver Stone, who is a friend of mine, even though he's like a total communist, I do love Oliver. I was in his movie, the Wall Street 2 movie, and we became very close personal friends. He just did a documentary, and we invited Oliver to come with us to Davos last year on nuclear power. And I would encourage you, if you are a proponent of nuclear power, which I am, okay, and people like Elon Musk are, I would encourage you to at least watch his documentary, because whatever you think of him, he's an incredible filmmaker, and he makes a very, very compelling case for greater usage of nuclear power, more enhanced safety around the power plants, and the dramatic reduction in carbon that would bring to the world. So I am a big, big fan of it, yes.
Yes, the member just here.
You guys are like nicer than the White House press corps, you know. You're also a little less drunk than the White House press corps. I mean, those people were like drinking at like 10 o'clock in the morning, you know.
I'll try to give you a nice, fair question then. You mentioned you're a lifelong Republican, and you also mentioned your enthusiasm for support for Ukraine. What do you think explains the ambivalence by Republicans in supporting Ukraine militarily?
So this is a really good question. For whatever reason, Mr. Trump is very sympathetic to Vladimir Putin. And we can go into all the different reasons why, but let's just stipulate that, because I want to answer the question as quickly as possible. A result of which there's a lane in Republican Party politics to follow that MAGA Trump lane. Moreover, because of this angry, older white demographic, there's a media lane to follow that as well, that Tucker Carlson is following, and OAN News and Newsmax and those people are following. And if you pin them and you ask them why they're doing it, okay, they never give you a concrete answer. But it is because it sells and they get ratings from it. And that lane is a comfortable lane for a lot of these Republicans, so they don't get primaried from even more ultra-right people than them. Now, if you have an interest in reading about this stuff, I would recommend Catherine Belton's book. It's called Putin's People. And she's a former Financial Times bureau chief, Moscow bureau chief. And H.R. McMaster, in the middle of the pandemic, sent me a copy of the book. He FedExed it to me, and he implored me to read the book. And if you read the book, you will learn that there has been orchestrated disinformation campaigns here in the United Kingdom, in France, in the United States, by Putin and his people to create hysteria, to create dissension. They manufacture personalities, they manufacture conversations with people to create further tribalism and further dissension in the country. And that's been effective in the United States. So that's another reason why you have that. If you want me to explain the Ukraine thing, why I'm a defender of the Ukraine, I'm happy to do that. If you want me 2 minutes on that?
Yeah, I think.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Because I think it's very important to people to understand where we are at this turning point in the world. Okay, so we are 80 years out from the war. And if you really understand generational cycles and you take it back through history, that is a very dangerous place to be. Okay, so if you start with the Napoleonic War in 1815, von Metternich, who Kissinger studied and obviously wrote lots about, came up with a balancing test for Europe. And at the Congress of Vienna, when they signed that treaty, they were able to sustain the peace more or less. There was, the French and Germans went after each other in 1848, but by and large, there was almost 100 years of peace on the continent. That's the first time since Charlemagne that the continent wasn't in an aggressive war. And so the treaty worked. But what happens is you go through the Napoleonic Wars and you have your family murdered, civilian family murdered, or your husband or wife was killed in the military. You don't want a war. And you have this wartime memory. But as you age out of the living people, you always get a rise of nationalism, and you always get a glorification of war. And so Barbara Tuchman wrote about this in a book called The Guns of August. What she basically said is we had this great treaty put in place at the Congress of Vienna, and by 1914, we had this systemic rise of nationalism, and we had this systemic rise of Germany first, France first, the bellicosity of rhetoric. The Archduke is assassinated. It touches off the war, the Guns of August. The great powers think that this is a war that's going to last a few weeks or months. It goes on for 4 years, absolutely devastating to the continent. And you come out of that war and you totally screw up the treaty. So now the treaty pins the Germans and gives them all of these wartime reparations that they can't afford, touches off massive inflation in the country. And so the failed treaty creates another war, okay, and the rise of Nazism. So we get it right at the end of the Second World War, and we create the post-World War II architecture for a lasting peace, but it's now in overtime. Because my uncle, who I was named after, who died 20 years ago, who was 19 when he fought on Normandy Beach, and he got the Silver Star and the Purple Heart, he's dead. He's not here to regale us on the horror of that war. There's no political leaders left from that era. Okay, Henry Kissinger's left from that era, but he's not in power. So you see what happens? You get this rise of nationalism. In 1955, when they put the European Union together, it's because people are like, enough, no more war. Now we want to break it apart because of this nationalism, because of this fervor. And people like Donald Trump or Nigel Farage, or you pick the people. Okay, but you have to figure out a way to cheat history. And so a result of which you get somebody like Vladimir Putin who's going after, and Ukraine has its problems. I'm not saying it's a perfect country, and I'm sure there's corruption in the country, but it has by and large been a peaceful nation since it became sovereign after the demise of the Soviet Union. And we made guarantees to that country. We made guarantees. You can ask President Clinton if you can get him back here to speak, okay? And I had him at my conference in April of last year, and we talked about it. They gave up their nukes, sixth largest nuclear arsenal in the world. They gave them up in exchange for security ideas, okay? And so there was no reason for that invasion. But if you let that invasion stand, you are sending a message to people that you're going to equivocate with autocrats and dictators, and we cannot afford to do that. Okay, you'll end up losing your freedom, and your freedom is very valuable. Trust me. So that's the answer.
Just a very quick follow-up question to that on the equivocation. Do you think part of the failures with the U.S. Foreign policy strategy towards Russia was that for too long, sort of after the Clinton administration, there was an attempt to bring Russia into the community, and even and to sort of not go hard enough in Georgia, 2008, and then Crimea and these sort of things which really undercut the legitimacy of the deterrents that were in place through those treaties.
So the answer to that question is correct. Somebody brought up Ronald Reagan. So what Reagan would say that you get your highest level of peace through strength. Okay, if you go back to the Leviathan, which was written 300 or 400 years ago, what did Thomas Hobbes say in the Leviathan? He said that the world has its greatest level of peace when there's one hegemon that is suppressing the internecine tribal fights. Okay, that could be the Roman Empire, the British Empire, or the American Empire. But the point that Hobbes was making is if you have one person or one entity that can suppress the internecine fights, you'll get more peace. And what happened with us, and people will be mad at me if they're Democrats, but when Obama said we have a red line in the sand in Syria, and then the line got crossed, nothing happened. When we had the situation in Georgia, we had the situation in Crimea, nothing happened. You created this wide open space. When Trump left office, the people around Vladimir Putin, okay, according to Catherine Belton, felt that the West was in disarray and that we had splintered the NATO alliance. Okay, Vladimir Putin did something that no Western leader could do, frankly, is he unified the goddamn alliance. Okay, no Western leader was going to be able to do that, but he did it. Okay, and here's something the U.S. did do, and you have to give the U.S. credit for this. We shared all the signal intelligence on this. Okay, and so we went to the Five Eyes, we went to all the Western leaders and said, okay, this is what's going down, and he's on your doorstep, and he's coming for the Ukraine, and he's not going to stop at the Ukraine, because he's been very clear about reknitting the former Soviet Union together. And so the Western leaders conjoined as a result of that really, really good intelligence. So yeah, no, we equivocated, and when you do that, you set yourself up for a recipe for it. When you create space, and you guys know this because this is an educated group of people, but he's been weakened in his own country. He has very bad demographics, he has high alcoholism, he has high unemployment. Okay, the country is way more multi-ethnic than it was before. It's not just white Russia anymore. And he's been weakened in his country. Okay, and when you're weakened and you're an autocrat like that, making a move on another country galvanizes a base of people around you and it rallies them. Now, he did not anticipate that the United States and the NATO allies would do what they did, because he had three signals from the West, Georgia, Crimea, and Syria, that we weren't going to do what we did.
I think we have time for a few more questions.
There's a couple over here, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you touched on polarization a little bit, and I was just wondering if you have any advice to offer those of us who are sort of coming of voting age during this time where, like you said, it's very dominated by the news cycle, and social media is sort of like the main form of voter education, unfortunately. And I know in the 2020 election, the demographic of sort of like 18 to 22-year-olds, college students, were instrumental in getting Biden elected. So yeah, I guess do you have any advice for like fostering those productive conversations about the core values of democracy?
So listen, it's a great question. And so the cynics will say, everything I'm about to say cannot happen. Cynics will say that. But remember, I'm an entrepreneur, okay? And I started with nothing. And a good entrepreneur, you start with zero and then you create one, right? You go from 0 to 1. And so we have to do that in American politics. So here are 3 or 4 things that I really believe have to happen. We have not amended the Constitution since 1993. Okay, so let's just go over the math for everybody. We have 27 amendments to the Constitution, ratified in 1790. We're picking up an amendment once every 9 years, but the last amendment was 1993, 29 years ago. That was a procedural amendment. The big amendment, last big amendment, was 58 years ago. That was the Civil Rights Voting Act. Okay, so the document was designed to be elastic and a living document that each generation should take a stab at, and when they got it wrong, they had prohibition, and they repealed prohibition. But it has to be a living document. So number one, we need a constitutional amendment to end gerrymandering, because you have to make those districts fair and proportionate again, and more recognizable to geometry. If you do that, you'll liquidate the extremists in both parties. Remember, these politicians really just want power, and these campaigns are marketing competitions. And so if you have moderates in the room and you have others in the room, you will get more moderate politicians, okay? Number two, you have to end the Citizens United Supreme Court case. That is literally the Plessy versus Ferguson for the democracy. It is completely unfair. And it's under the ruse of the First Amendment, but it's not. It's created an uneven playing field in the democracy. And like Brown versus Board of Education ended that segregation, we need to admit that we got that wrong, okay? And then the third thing, and this is something that's softer than those two things, is we need people, and I said this in our private remarks upstairs, there's a voting bloc in the United States that votes the exact same way every time. It's 144 million people. They vote the exact same way every single time. And who are those people? Those are the people that don't vote. Go look it up. 144 million people every single year registered to vote in the US. They don't exercise their right to vote. We have to figure out, we need a clever strategy to bring those people back in. And if we do that, okay, you'll see real positive change. I really do believe that. It's a really good question. And all those things I just said, a cynic would say would never happen, but we have to start somewhere.
I think one final question, just there. Just can you wait for the mic, please? Thanks.
So 2 slightly unrelated questions, one on FTX and one on that New Yorker interview that you gave. So on FTX, why continue to invest in crypto after your company's lost billions of dollars, and also the trust of your investors in crypto? And your second question on the New Yorker interview, would you actually have fired your entire communications department?
Okay, so did you hear it? Because I was having a hard time.
I think the first question was...
I think the first one was related to FTX.
Yeah, about crypto.
Yeah, so I think what you said is we lost billions of dollars. That was factually not accurate. We didn't lose billions of dollars. And in the FTX situation, if you'll recall from the facts, he gave us the money. He made the investment in us. So we still have that money. We're sitting on about $50 million. Only gained. So yeah, no, I think what you're saying isn't factually correct, but I'm happy to state what the facts are, and then we can debate it. But the FTX situation, they gave us the money. I lost about $10 million, $9.6 million on the FTT token. I think the 400,000 that you're referencing is the 9.6. The 10 million minus the 9.6. So we had 400,000 from that. But we put the other money into Bitcoin and a few other tokens, which have done very, very well this year. They got hit this week because of the SEC indictments to Binance and Coinbase, but they're still up about 50% this year. So my firm's balance sheet, we're sitting on about $50 million worth of cash and crypto assets, and we're working now with the bankruptcy estate to buy back our shares. So as of that point, we haven't lost any money. If you're talking about our bad performance last year, we lost 40% in our fund. We made a shift into crypto, but remember, we were up about 35% in 2021. And so we did make a shift into crypto, happy to explain why. But if you look at the up, the down, and now the up this year, we're down about 22%, which I think in a business like ours, given the volatility, the Fed rate hikes, and the growth, it's sort of tracking what Cathie Wood is doing at ARK. And so we've been gaining new assets again. And, I've been doing this for 35 years. And so I've had 4 really bad years. 2022 was a really bad year for me. But what I would say to you is what I say to my clients. Everyone's a long-term investor until they have short-term losses. If people just stay patient, stay the course, I think we own great assets and we'll make the money back. But the Bloomberg article that I was referring to where the woman was lighting me up, she just wanted to focus on the 6 or 7 months of ungodly terror that Skybridge experienced, okay? And that's fine, you can do that. But if you zoom out, people that have been with us for a very long period of time have actually done very well. So it depends on which slice of time that you want to take it. And so maybe you guys will invite me back in 5 years. I think people that are with us are going to do very well. But I don't know that for certain. But I like the odds of it because I've been doing it 35 years. So there was a second question, though. So what was the second question?
So on the New Yorker phone call, would you really have fired your entire communications department, and why did you decide to fire them?
Well, so first of all, that phone call, if you remember, he was a local to my hometown. I had known his family for 50 years. I knew him for 25 of those 50 years. My dad worked on the same construction site as that reporter's father. And so, mistake on me. I trusted him. I was having an off-color, Long Island sort of New York conversation with him, which I didn't think was going to see the light of day. Now, he is correct. I didn't technically say that it was off the record. And so he wanted to run with the story, and he thought that was going to make him very famous, and it was certainly going to damage Mr. Trump and me. And I said to him, the moment that he did that, I said, okay, our families have known each other since the 1960s. If you do that, that's very transactional. We're no longer going to have a relationship. I will get fired, and we'll no longer have a relationship. He didn't care, and so he did it. Onus on me, not him. He never blamed him for that. But he did say in the article, which I'm quoted on, and I'm on tape saying it, that I would have fired the whole staff. And the answer to the question is yes, I would have fired that whole staff. And I want to explain to you why. That staff was warring with each other. So you had Trump loyalists that were very, very mad at the Republican National Committee establishment people that are working alongside of them. So those RNC people disliked Mr. Trump, and they were trying to stop Mr. Trump. I mean, they pulled his mic at the CNBC debate and all this other stuff. And so there was this warring animus and there was this warring hatred between the two of them, okay? And so examples I was giving them were the Hillary Clinton with Barack Obama, Seward, Chase, all these different people that Abraham Lincoln accepted into his cabinet. And what I said to these people is, we're on the same team, we're wearing the same jersey now. You have to stop the warring with each other. If you don't stop the warring with each other, I'm going to fire everybody, and I will go outside of the people here in this room, and I will rebuild this thing from scratch. Now, I wouldn't have fired Sarah because I designated her as the press secretary, and she was on board with me. Okay, she was trying to heal the rift between the Trump people and the more establishment RNC people. So the answer to that question is yes. And I'll say this to entrepreneurs, you can't deal with inter-office warfare and inter-office political sniping. It's too petty. You got to get people in the room that are going to focus on the long-term goals. Now, I was going to give them time and space, okay, to do that. But yes, if I had stayed in that job long enough, I would have fired every one of them if they were not going to dial back their rifts and dial back their hatreds and focus on the goal, which was, to me, serving the American people and not being pissed at each other because of something that happened on the campaign, which was over 6 or 8 months ago. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, you have another question. This is more fun. This is more like the journalist now. Yeah. What was the leak? What was the leak? Yeah.
You did say at the time it was about leaks made to the press rather than about the divide between the RNC versus Trump era.
You know, the leaks were horrific. So they were leaking on each other and they were leaking on the president. And again, whether you like the president or dislike the president, he deserved a staff that wasn't going to leak on him and undermine him. The reason why Bannon got fired, which I think is my single contribution to human history, is I helped to get that asshole fired, okay, is I explained to the president what he was doing to undermine him. I built for the president like the Homeland Matrix that explained how Bannon was leaking on him and trying to get people to think that Trump was his hand puppet. Now, Bannon was the most dangerous person in that administration. And so, you know, one of my proudest moments is he got fired on the same day that I got fired, but he was such a baby. You know, he asked General Kelly if he could stay 2 more weeks so he didn't have to walk out of the White House with me. But yeah, no, they were leaking on the president, and he didn't deserve that. And by the way, my firing, if you notice, didn't get leaked. It got announced by Sarah to the great surprise of some people, but not the surprise of me. I deserve to get fired for what happened and my trusting that reporter. And I took it like a man, and I don't blame anybody but myself. And General Kelly and I became very close personal friends, and we do speaking engagements all over the world. No problem. Any other questions?
No,
These are good questions.
It's a really admirable way of going out and about your viewpoint towards it. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Those are good questions. See, she's more like a journalist. You know, she's coming hard at me. It's very good. Yeah.
Do you want to keep going for a bit, or is it?
I'm good. I'm good to go. I mean, yeah, I'm going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
More questions. Yes, sir.
Oh, on the front row.
Yeah.
Thanks again for a very informative talk. I've got a very trivial question, but I've got to have an answer. Why do they call you the Mooch?
Why do they call me the Mooch? So, you know, this is, we're going back to the 1970s now. I had a German immigrant who was my phys ed teacher, and he effing hated every single one of us that had 4-syllable last names, okay? So this was the most politically incorrect German phys ed teacher that you could imagine in the public school, in the elementary school. And so every person that had a 4-syllable last name, he automatically disdained. And so he picked 1 syllable of your last name and he called you by that. Okay, so I have 4 syllables of my last name. So he got to the 3rd syllable, which is Scaramucci, and he started calling me Mooch. And so in 1972, he was calling me Mooch. Every one of my friends called me Mooch. I think I had Mooch on my varsity football jacket. And so when the press got a hold of that, because they thought it was a pejorative, you know, they thought, oh, you know, they're calling him the Mooch. That's a bad thing to call the guy. I didn't give a shit. I thought it was fine, you know, and that's how I got the name. So it's been 50 years. And let me tell you something, going into politics, I've been called way worse than the Mooch. Trust me, you know, and it's all good. But it's a good question, yeah. But, you know, that was a different time in America, man. It was early 70s. There was no sensitivity to anybody. And if you were ethnic in that school, you were getting your ass kicked.
Any questions?
There's a couple of questions over here. We'll get to your question. Let me get these first.
Guy, black hoodie in the 3rd row.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming to speak to us today. We've seen cultural depictions of the White House and American politics in TV shows like The West Wing and Veep. And I was just wondering, have you watched The West Wing? And if you have, how accurately does it portray American politics or the White House, or particularly, I guess, the role of Toby Ziegler, the communications director?
It was a House of Cards, right? You saw the House of Cards. So I don't think that those are great renditions. They're great shows, and Aaron Sorkin is a great screenwriter, but I don't think they're great renditions because it's totally not like Hollywood. And let me explain why. If the question or the issue gets to the White House, you know, when I had my first briefing, one of the CIA guys said to me, and I'll share with you what he said. He said, "Hey, Anthony, there are workhorses in Washington and there are show horses. And you'll know very quickly who the workhorses are, who are trying to help the people, and who the show horses are, who are just preening for the cameras. You'll figure that out." And so you have a lot of that that goes on, and there was probably less of that represented in shows like The West Wing. Number two, if it's in the presidential daily brief, that means that there's been a collection of people in the American government that think this is a very serious issue for the United States, national security, economic or otherwise. And if it's there and a decision has to be made, that means that there's 5,000 people in the American government that could not make that decision. And now it's on the desk of the president and his staff or her staff to try to figure it out. And now let me give you the bad news about that. Any outcome from that decision, there will be bad effects. So now it's such a difficult decision that there's no no-brainer decision. And let me use the bin Laden case as an example. And my last point would be that unlike Hollywood, you don't know the answer to the question. There's no certainty. Okay, so in the bin Laden situation, the president, he was told a 50, 60% chance that Mr. bin Laden was in that house. And that was based on signal intelligence, the satellite stuff. There were two interesting facts which you could read about. One was there was no cell phone call from that house. So there was a 900 square mile radius, and the CIA looked at every single house in the area, and there was a cell phone call or a hardline call, but not from that house. And if you remember, the last call that Mr. bin Laden made was to his mom on a satellite phone in the Tor Bor Mountains, and we had a Predator drone over his head 5 minutes late. We shot the missile at him, but we missed him. And so he didn't make any more phone calls, and there was one house sticking out like a sore thumb. Okay, but again, we didn't know if he was in the house or not, but that was one. They had just called like Nick's Beef and Shawarma and ordered takeout. That would have been knocked off the table for the CIA. Second thing that we did, you may have read about this, we sent a doctor to the house to offer the children in the house immunizations. Anybody remember reading that story? So we sent the doctor. The doctor went to the house, gave the children immunizations. We sent the vials back to Langley, and we discovered that there was bin Laden DNA in the children. But again, we didn't know if it was Osama bin Laden because there were many relatives. So the president is now operating in the dark. He doesn't know if the person's in the house or not. And guess what? We now have to make a decision. And so this is the dilemma that goes on in the White House. It's not like Hollywood where you know the answer. Okay, more facts, which I think are interesting about that situation, is we built a compound out west, and we had the SEAL team practicing the raid, but we made one colossal mistake when we built the compound. We put a chain link fence around the compound. We had the house identically built. We had the different floors and levels built properly, but we needed to wall that thing off because when that first copter landed, there was a vacuum vortex, but when it was landing with the chain link fence, there was no vacuum vortex. And so the copter got caught in the vacuum vortex and smashed into the side wall. Now you guys know this, but I'll repeat it. The tail of the copter ended up on the other side of the wall. The Pakistanis sold that to the Chinese. They were super mad at us. And we blew up the copter that was damaged. Again, Barack Obama, he's making these decisions with a group of people, but he's got to make the decisions himself. He is the one that recommended the third copter. And had we not had the third copter, there would have been a lot of trouble getting those men and all of that, those dossiers of information that we got out of the house, which saved countless terrorist attacks, out of the house. But Mr. Obama, President Obama himself, made that decision to add a copter to the assault. So that's the stuff that's happening in real life versus, say, Hollywood, right? But again, in that decision, the United States got it right. They captured bin Laden, but as I said, when you're making decisions like that, there's some positive things, but there's also negative things. It hurt our relationship with the Pakistanis, and it caused great consternation in the Middle East because, you're going to be, what are you doing? You're going into a sovereign country without their permission, without tipping them off, and you're hurting the political standing of your friends in the region if you're doing that. Okay, and so again, there's this push-pull. These decisions are very, very hard to make, and let me tell you, you get a lot wrong when you're making them. Should we take another question?
Yeah, I think one
Why
more
don't we
question.
take two more questions? I will take this question here, take that question. I think you had a last question, and we'll call it. These three questions, and I'll talk quickly.
Yeah, so like when I came here, all I could really think about was how you were depicted on Saturday Night Live. So I guess my question is, do you ever watch those clips of those 10 days?
Yeah, I mean, it's great.
If
Do you think
your legacy is just going to be, like this funny guy that got fired in the end?
So I've been called everything. So here's what I would say. It's probably not an appropriate analogy for the UK, but if you're playing American football and you put the helmet on, you've got the jersey on, you have to expect to get a concussion. It's guaranteed, unless you're a punter or a place kicker, you're going to get a concussion. If you're going into American politics at the highest level, like working in the White House, you're guaranteed to have something happen to you. It's very, very rare that your adversaries are not going to go after you or demonize you or two-dimensionalize you or caricature you, because the minute they do that, if they're effective at it, then the things that you're saying won't be taken as seriously, right? So we know that negative campaigning works. So for me, I accepted the job, got the concussion. I'm not a baby. I would never complain about it. I was at the Met-Yankee game, and Lorne Michaels, who created Saturday Night Live, he was sitting next to me with Paul Simon, the American singer, Simon and Garfunkel, and he looked at me, he said, "Mooch, how did you like our rendition of you?" It was played by Bill Hader, and I looked over him, I said, "Listen, it could have used more hairspray and a tighter tie." Okay, and so he laughed, and he said, "Hey, would you like to come and meet the cast of Saturday Night Live?" And I said, "I certainly would." And so I think my son Anthony's here, I brought him, and I think I brought his girlfriend, and we went to Saturday Night Live, and the cold open, it was the Christmas show, and there was Alec Baldwin, and he was at the Christmas tree of hate and the Christmas tree of love. And so he had this Sarah Huckabee Sanders comedian, woman, and he turned to her and he said, "Sarah, give me the ornaments for the Christmas tree of love." And Ivanka Trump, meaning he only loves Ivanka, right? Everyone laughed. They said, "Give me the ornaments for the Christmas tree of hate, Chris Christie, Jeff Sessions. Where's the Mooch's ornament? Where's the Mooch?" And there was my head on an ornament, and they panned to me in the upper deck, and I was redder than this chair. And I waved to everybody, and the whole place cheered. And Alec Baldwin put the Christmas ornament on the tree, okay? And I went to the after party, and I asked Alec Baldwin for the ornament, and it's on my Christmas tree at home, okay? And why? Because if you can't take the joke, if you can't roll with the punches, don't get into the arena. Stephen Colbert said to me, "Hey, do you think you're going to last a long time as the White House communications director?" I said, "Hey, longer than a carton of milk in the refrigerator," okay? Now, I understand Prime Minister Truss got a little miffed at me. I put out on Twitter that she lasted 4.1 Scaramucci's. She got pissed. Okay? I thought it was funny. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. Right? I mean, you gotta be able to roll with the punches. But it's a really good question. And by the way, how many people here, just by a show of hands, have a social media account? It could be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. How many people? Okay, and how many people have more than 100 followers? Anybody have more than 100 followers? Okay, let me give you some bad news. You are definitionally now a quasi-public figure. Because if you have 100 followers, because of the way exponential impact works, something happens, it will exponentially explode in social media. And so we have these rolling cancellations and these rolling, misfires. Chris Licht, I don't know if you guys know who he is, but he was the president of CNN. He was let go today. And Chris was the producer of the Stephen Colbert show the week that I went on the show after I got my ass fired from the White House. And he's a very, very nice guy. He's very talented, but he had a series of missteps and a really bad article written about him last week, and he got fired. Now, he lasted 40.6 Scaramucci's. Okay, so now, I didn't put that out there because I didn't want to get him upset, but I called him this morning to tell him, it sucks, you got fired, it's brutal, but you will get through it. And I think it's a very good message for everybody in this room. If you're having a bad day, as long as it's not cancer, it can't be worse than the day I was having at the White House when I got fired that day, okay? And then I got lit up by every late night comedian. And I think the message to people is shake it off, show people that you're resilient, and don't be a baby. Okay, there was one more question over here, or no?
Just, if you...
Was there a question?
Just down to the guy there.
Yeah, okay, we'll end it here. I think this is the last question. I'll get to you afterwards, we'll talk again.
Thank you very much for coming here today. Earlier you said, I don't remember your exact words, but Trump has been shown to have a soft stance towards Putin, and you weren't going to go into it at that moment, but I was wondering if you could say a few more words why you think Trump.
So I don't think it's related to them having anything on him. People are saying they have like a dossier on him. I don't think it's related to that. I think it's purely related to money. I think what you would learn about Mr. Trump is that he sold a tremendous amount of condominiums all over the world to oligarchs. And it's an allegation, but I think you could look into it. There was probably some serious money laundering that took place with those oligarchs. And I think he knows where his bread is buttered financially. And so the two things that Trump loves, not people, he treats people like objects, he doesn't love them, but he loves money and he loves attention. And so Putin to him, by being nice to him the way he is, it's good for business for Donald Trump. Okay, and I could get into more details on it and provide more evidence, but that's really the reason. It's not related to, I think, him having something on Trump. They never met each other prior to the presidency.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Okay, guys, thank you. I've spent a lot of time.
Thanks so much.